Welcome to the Midnight Library, a place where the night feels calm, the world slows down, and stories become a gentle pathway to rest. Find a quiet spot, settle in, and let your body sink into stillness. Breathe deeply in and out, leaving the day behind. This is your time to rest, your time to dream, your time to drift. And now, let us begin tonight's story.
There was once a narrow cobblestone lane, tucked away at the quiet edge of a small town. Few people passed down that lane, for it seemed to lead nowhere. The houses thinned out, the shops gave way to silence, and ivy crept over the old stone walls as though protecting a secret. At the very end of that lane stood an iron gate, blackened with age. Its bars were wrapped in vines, so thick and tangled that from a distance one might not notice the gate at all. Behind it, something waited. Evelyn, who often wandered through the town on long evening walks, had passed the lane many times without thinking twice. But one evening, as the sun was dipping low and the first stars appeared, she felt drawn to it. There was nothing urgent in the feeling, only a soft tug, like the way a breeze might lift a strand of hair. Her steps slowed. She turned. And for the first time, she let herself wander down the cobblestones, listening to the hush that seemed to deepen with every footfall. At the end, she found the gate. She brushed her hand across the cool iron, noticing how the vines seemed to loosen slightly under her touch, almost as if they recognized her. Through the gaps in the leaves, she caught glimpses of what lay beyond. A path, a shimmer of pale flowers, the faint sound of water, though she could see no fountain or stream. The gate did not resist her. It swung inward with a sigh, as though it had been waiting a very long time for someone to open it. Evelyn stepped inside, and the garden exhaled. The air grew warmer, touched with fragrance so delicate she could not name it, something between roses and rain, memory and dream. The light was softer here, as though the sky itself had slowed its descent into night. Everywhere, life blossomed. Tall hedges leaned like old guardians. Flowers opened as she passed, petals turning toward her with silent greeting. A marble bench, worn smooth by time, seemed to be waiting for her to sit. There was no doubt, this was not just a garden. It was a place of waiting. And now, it had welcomed her in. There was once a narrow cobblestone lane, tucked away at the quiet edge of a small town. Few people ever wandered down it. The main streets bustled with shops, cafes, and neighbors exchanging cheerful words, but the little lane was different. It was quieter, gentler, as though time itself had forgotten it. The stones underfoot were worn smooth, their edges softened by countless years of footsteps that no longer came. Moss crept between the cracks, and ivy trailed down the high stone walls on either side, covering them like a green quilt. At the very end of this lane stood an iron gate, blackened with age. Its bars curved into elegant patterns, though many were hidden beneath thick knots of ivy and wild climbing roses. Their blossoms were pale and luminous, as if they had borrowed their glow from the moon itself. To most, the gate appeared to guard nothing, just a tangle of shadows and leaves. Yet if one stood very still, with the town far behind and the evening air settling cool on their skin, they might feel the faintest sense of something beyond, something waiting. Evelyn, who had made it her habit to take long evening walks, often passed the entrance without a glance. Her routes were usually familiar: the busy square, the bookshop with its glowing windows, the stretch of river where lamps shimmered on the water. But on this night, when the sun had dipped into a wash of amber and violet, and the first stars glimmered faintly above the rooftops, something felt different. She paused at the head of the lane. The air seemed hushed here, as though the world itself were holding its breath. A faint breeze touched her cheek, carrying with it the fragrance of damp earth and flowers she could not name. It was not a fragrance that belonged to the streets she knew. It was older, softer, almost like the scent of a memory. Without quite meaning to, she turned her steps down the cobblestones. Each footfall sounded louder than it should have, echoing faintly as if the lane were hollow with waiting. The walls leaned inward slightly, guiding her gently forward. Above her, ivy leaves rustled, though no wind stirred. She had the curious sensation that the lane was not simply leading her somewhere, it was leading her back, as though she had been here before in a dream. At last, she stood before the iron gate. Her fingers hovered for a moment before she touched it, expecting it to be rough with rust. Instead, the metal was cool and smooth beneath her hand, worn by time rather than corroded by it. The vines shifted at her touch, their leaves curling back as though to let her see. Through the small gaps she glimpsed more than she expected, the curve of a stone path, glimmers of pale blossoms, and the faintest shimmer of water reflecting hidden light. The sound of the town had completely faded now. No footsteps, no voices, no carts rattling across the distant square. All she could hear was the quiet pulse of her own breath and the faint trickle of unseen water. The gate, though heavy in appearance, did not resist her. When she pressed gently, it opened inward with the sigh of something that had been waiting too long, longing at last to move. Evelyn stepped across the threshold. The change was immediate. The air inside was warmer, rich with fragrance, roses, lavender, and something rarer, something she could not name, a scent that seemed to come not only from the flowers, but from the earth itself. The colors of the world shifted too, though night was falling beyond the walls. Within the garden a soft twilight lingered, as though the sun had paused just for this place. Everywhere, life bloomed. Roses of every shade leaned toward her path. Tall hedges arched into doorways of green, their leaves whispering as though passing along her arrival. Flowers unfolded their petals as she passed, revealing centers glowing faintly with captured light. A marble bench, worn smooth by years of waiting, stood beneath a tree whose branches shimmered with blossoms that looked like stars. The garden did not feel deserted. It felt alive, aware, as though it had been holding its breath for countless evenings, waiting not for anyone, but for her. And as she took her first slow step deeper into its embrace, Evelyn realized this was not simply a garden. It was a place of waiting. And now, the waiting had ended. Evelyn lingered at the edge of the gate, letting her eyes adjust to the strange twilight within. The garden seemed larger than it had any right to be. From the outside, the walls had appeared narrow, closing off only a small space, but from here, the paths seemed endless, stretching in winding ribbons beneath arches of green. She walked slowly, her shoes tapping lightly against the smooth stones of the path. The sound was swallowed almost at once, absorbed by the hush that filled the air. Only the faint rustle of leaves accompanied her, a rustle that seemed almost like words. If she tilted her head, she could almost believe the hedges were whispering to one another. To her left, a row of white lilies swayed though the air was still. Their petals glimmered faintly, like lanterns guiding her deeper. To her right, roses leaned heavy on their stems, their blossoms so large and luminous they looked painted rather than real. Their fragrance was thick, yet not cloying. It floated around her like a gentle veil, steady and calming. Further on, she found a fountain. It was smaller than she expected, made of pale stone, its edges softened with moss. Water trickled from the mouth of a carved bird into a shallow pool. The surface shimmered with ripples, and when Evelyn leaned closer, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection. But it did not look quite the same as it had in her mirror that morning. Here, her face seemed softer, her eyes brighter, as though the garden itself had smoothed away the weariness she carried. She lingered, listening to the trickle, and realized how rare it was for her to stand so still. The world beyond the gate had always hurried her forward, errands, conversations, the rhythm of daily life. But here, the air held her gently, as though asking nothing of her but to breathe. When she finally moved on, the path curved beneath an archway of vines. Beyond it, the garden deepened. Trees stood tall, their branches laced with blossoms that released a faint golden glow. Beneath them grew carpets of tiny flowers, their petals shifting color as though painted by passing dreams. She noticed a bench beneath one of the trees, carved from marble and worn smooth by time. The curve of it seemed to fit her perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. She sat, the cool stone pressing against her palms, and tilted her head back to gaze at the branches above. They swayed gently, though no wind touched them. Petals drifted down like falling stars, settling on her shoulders, her lap, her hair. Instead of brushing them away, Evelyn let them rest. Their weight was nothing at all, yet she felt strangely comforted, as though the garden were placing a blessing upon her. Somewhere deeper in the shadows, a bird sang. Its notes were soft, unhurried, a lullaby threaded through the silence. Evelyn closed her eyes to listen, and for a long while she lost track of time. When she opened them again, she noticed something strange. The flowers around the bench had turned their faces toward her, as though recognizing her presence. The entire garden seemed to breathe with her, its stillness rising and falling in rhythm with her own chest. It was not just alive. It was aware. And as Evelyn sat in the quiet embrace of its blossoms and stone, she realized something remarkable. The garden had not been waiting for just anyone. It had been waiting for her. Evelyn sat for a long while upon the marble bench, her body still, her breath quiet, her heart slower than she could ever remember it being. The garden seemed to breathe with her, an inhale when she inhaled, an exhale when she released. The rhythm was gentle, as though the entire place had chosen to match itself to her. The longer she sat, the more details emerged, as if the garden were unveiling itself one layer at a time. At first, she noticed only the blossoms that had drifted into her lap and hair, soft and glowing like faintly luminous snowflakes. But then her eyes traced the petals scattered across the ground, forming patterns too delicate to be random. Swirls, spirals, arcs that curved toward the path she had not yet taken. The air was filled with fragrance, but not a single overwhelming scent. Instead, it was like a tapestry woven from many threads, lavender at the edges, roses in the center, the sharp, green sweetness of grass, the cool dampness of stone. Every breath filled her chest with quiet reassurance, a comfort she had not known she was seeking. The fountain behind her whispered steadily, its trickle endless and patient. She imagined the water had been falling like this for centuries, never hurrying, never pausing, just singing its soft lullaby to the flowers. If she closed her eyes, she could almost believe it was the heartbeat of the garden itself. When she finally rose, the path seemed to extend further than before. She had not noticed it at first. It had been hidden by shadows and vines, but now, as if an invitation, the way forward was clear. Small lantern-shaped flowers glowed faintly on either side, marking her steps with pools of silver light. She moved slowly, each footstep light upon the stones, and the hush of the garden followed her like a companion. The hedges on either side rose high, their tops curling inward like guardians bowing their heads. Their leaves whispered, not quite in words, but in a murmur of welcome that stirred her skin like a faint touch. Here and there, she paused to look more closely. At the base of one hedge, tiny blue blossoms peeked out, so delicate they looked as though they would vanish if she reached for them. Further along, a cluster of pale flowers grew in spirals, each one opening and closing as though in gentle breathing. She crouched to watch them for a moment, marveling at their rhythm. They seemed alive in a way that flowers should not be, listening, responding, aware. At last, she came to another clearing. The path widened into a small circle of grass, where a tree stood in the center. Its trunk was silver gray, its bark smooth and faintly gleaming in the twilight. From its branches hung blossoms shaped like stars, their light a soft gold that shimmered against the darker sky above. The petals fell slowly, not all at once, but one at a time, as though the tree were timing them carefully. Each one landed upon the grass without a sound, glowing faintly before fading into the earth. Evelyn felt a pull to stand beneath it, and when she did, she understood. The tree was not merely beautiful. It was listening. Its branches arched overhead in a way that felt protective, sheltering, and the air beneath it was thick with calm. She tilted her head back, and for a moment, she could swear the blossoms above were not only drifting down but leaning toward her, acknowledging her arrival. She whispered, though she did not know why. "I'm here." The tree shivered, a single ripple through its leaves, like an answer. And Evelyn, with her hand pressed against the cool bark, realized that she was no longer only exploring the garden. She was being welcomed by it. Evelyn lingered beneath the silver gray tree until the hush around her seemed to deepen. It was not silence, not truly, for the fountain still whispered in the distance, and unseen creatures shifted softly in the grass. Yet it was the kind of hush that seemed filled with presence, as though the very air was listening. When she stepped away, petals clung to her shoulders and hair, drifting gently down to the path as she moved. Ahead, she noticed a narrow archway formed not of stone or wood, but of branches woven together. They curved into a perfect circle, leaves trembling faintly with a light that seemed to come from within. She passed through, and once again the garden changed. The path grew narrower, winding like a ribbon of pale stone through thick hedges. As she followed, the plants shifted subtly. Flowers she did not recognize appeared, delicate blossoms with translucent petals, glowing faintly as though painted with moonlight. Their colors were unlike any she had seen in nature, soft blues that shimmered into violet, creams that seemed to fade into silver. When she bent to look closer, their fragrance rose gently, and she realized it was sweeter than roses, yet somehow lighter, almost like a memory drifting past. The air itself was different here. It felt older, deeper, touched with a weight she could not name. The garden was no longer merely beautiful, it was ancient. Every leaf, every petal, every stone beneath her feet carried the stillness of centuries. At one bend in the path, she came upon a small pool. It was round and still, its surface so smooth it mirrored the branches above with perfect clarity. When she leaned closer, she expected to see her reflection once more. But this time, the face that gazed back at her was younger, freer, unburdened. Her eyes were brighter, her shoulders lighter, as though the water showed not only what she was, but what she might have been, or still could be. The sight filled her chest with something between wonder and longing. She touched the surface, and ripples spread outward in slow, steady rings, the reflection dissolving into the night sky above. When the pool stilled again, it reflected only the stars. Moving on, Evelyn noticed lanterns, yet they were not lanterns at all. Tiny orbs of light drifted lazily among the branches, hovering just above the path. They flickered gently, like fireflies, though their glow was steady, not trembling. Each one seemed to pause as she approached, hovering as though in greeting, before floating softly aside to let her pass. Further on, the path widened once more into another hidden clearing. At its center grew a sundial of pale stone, weathered by time. Yet when Evelyn looked closely, she saw no shadow falling upon it. Though twilight lingered, the sundial's face was bright, untouched by the dimness of night. It seemed to glow faintly, as though marking not hours, but something beyond time itself. She reached out, brushing her fingertips across the cool stone. For a moment she felt something stir, a quiet hum, like the vibration of a bell struck softly in the distance. It lasted only a breath, then faded back into stillness. The garden, she realized, was not simply a place of waiting. It was a place of keeping, of holding things beyond time, of guarding memories, moments, and truths too delicate for the world outside. And now it was beginning to share them with her. Evelyn stood in the clearing, her breath slow, her heart steady, the sundial before her and the soft glow of the garden around her. And she wondered, how much deeper did this waiting go? Evelyn lingered beneath the silver-gray tree until the hush around her seemed to deepen, drawing her inward like a lullaby. The silence was not empty, it was textured. The distant trickle of the fountain carried like a secret whispered in another room. Somewhere in the grass, a small animal scurried, its soft movement blending into the night. The air was filled with presence, as though the entire garden were leaning closer, listening to her heartbeat. When she finally stepped away from the tree, delicate petals clung to her shoulders, her hair, even her sleeves, drifting down gently as she moved, leaving a faint trail upon the path. Ahead of her, a new passage revealed itself, an archway formed not of stone or iron, but of living branches, their limbs bending and weaving into a perfect circle. The leaves shimmered faintly, trembling with a silvery glow that seemed to come from within rather than from the fading twilight. She hesitated only a moment before stepping through, and when she did, the garden changed. The pathway narrowed, its pale stones winding like a ribbon between thick hedges that rose taller than her head. Flowers appeared here she had never known in her waking life. Their petals were translucent, as though woven from light itself. Some glowed faintly in shades of pearl and moonstone, others shifted in color as she moved, catching the corner of her vision in glimmers of lavender, sapphire, and pale gold. She bent to breathe their fragrance, and the scent washed over her with a softness that defied description. It was sweeter than roses, lighter than jasmine, a fragrance that seemed less like something of the earth and more like a dream that lingered just before waking. When she closed her eyes, the smell seemed to fill her chest with calm, smoothing away the small, restless corners of her mind. As Evelyn walked deeper, she noticed the air itself carried a weight, not oppressive, but solemn, like a cathedral filled with quiet reverence. This was no ordinary garden. Its beauty was not only natural but ancient. The stillness seemed to stretch backward through centuries, as if every leaf and stone carried a memory. The longer she walked, the more she sensed she was moving not just through space, but through time. At a bend in the path, she discovered a small pool tucked between the hedges. It was perfectly round, the water so still it mirrored the branches above with impossible clarity. She leaned closer, expecting to see her reflection, and she did, but not as she was. The face in the water was her own, but younger, freer. Her eyes sparkled with an openness she had not seen in herself for years. There was no shadow of worry, no heaviness of regret, only the lightness of possibility. The water showed not just her reflection, but the self she had once been, or perhaps the self she still carried deep within. A soft ache touched her chest. She reached out with trembling fingers and brushed the surface of the water. Ripples spread outward in slow, perfect rings. Her reflection dissolved, replaced by the scattering stars above. The pool returned to stillness, holding only the night sky. Evelyn lingered, reluctant to leave, yet the path seemed to beckon her onward. As she rose, she noticed lights floating among the branches ahead. At first, she thought they were fireflies, but as she drew closer, she saw they were not insects at all. They were small orbs of pure light, drifting lazily in the air. Their glow was steady, calm, as if they existed only to illuminate her passage. One orb paused as she approached, hovering just before her face. It pulsed once, warmly, like a heartbeat. Then, with a gentle drift, it moved aside, allowing her to continue. Others followed suit, parting and rejoining as she walked, almost as if they were guiding her deeper into the heart of the garden. The path widened again, and in the clearing she found a sundial. It stood at the center, carved from pale stone, worn smooth by ages of weather. Yet there was no shadow cast upon it. Though twilight had fallen, the sundial glowed faintly, as if untouched by the ordinary laws of time. She stepped closer, her breath slow, and brushed her fingertips along the stone surface. For a fleeting instant, she felt it hum beneath her hand, a resonance, low and steady, like the distant toll of a bell heard through layers of memory. It vibrated in her bones, then faded, leaving her with a shiver of wonder. The realization came to her quietly. This garden was not simply a place that had waited. It was a place that kept. It gathered moments too fragile for the world outside, holding them safe within its walls. Here, time was not measured in hours or seasons, but in memories and echoes. As Evelyn stood there, the soft light of the orbs around her and the sundial glowing gently at her side, she understood. The garden was beginning to share its secrets with her. Not all at once, but little by little, as though testing her, as though asking her to prove she was ready. And she wondered, what deeper truths might it still be keeping, waiting quietly in the shadows, patient as the stars? The sundial lingered in Evelyn's mind long after she had left it behind. Its quiet glow and the faint hum beneath her hand had settled inside her like a secret heartbeat, reminding her that this garden held layers far beyond what she could see. The path curved on, softer now, no longer paved with stone, but lined with moss that cushioned her steps. Each footfall was nearly silent, as though the garden were teaching her to walk more gently, to move with the rhythm of its silence. Overhead, The branches arched lower, interwoven in delicate lacework that allowed the stars to glimmer through in scattered fragments. She passed through another arch of woven branches, and the garden opened suddenly into a vast clearing. Evelyn paused, her breath catching softly. Before her stretched a meadow of silver grass, each blade gleaming faintly as though brushed with moonlight. The field rippled with the slow rise and fall of a breeze she could not feel on her skin. In the center of this meadow stood a great oak, so wide that 5 people holding hands could not have encircled its trunk. Its branches spread high, their leaves shimmering faintly, shifting between green and silver as though they existed in 2 worlds at once. Evelyn felt drawn toward it, her steps unhurried but steady. The closer she came, the more she felt the air around her grow heavier, not in an oppressive way, but in reverence, as though the tree itself demanded silence. It was ancient, older than stone walls, older than the garden itself, perhaps older than the town she had left behind. When she reached the roots, she saw that they curled above the earth like the resting limbs of some great creature. Between 2 roots, a hollow formed a natural seat, wide and deep enough for her to rest in. Almost without thinking, Evelyn stepped into it and sank down, her body fitting perfectly into the curve of the tree's embrace. The moment her back touched the bark, she felt it. A pulse. Slow, steady, grounding. The tree was alive in ways beyond her understanding. Its heart beat deep within, resonating through her spine, through her chest, through her very breath. She closed her eyes, surrendering to it, and the garden unfolded itself around her in whispers. The sound was not in words, but in impressions, children's laughter carried by the wind, footsteps of long-forgotten visitors treading the same paths she had taken, the brush of silk skirts against the moss, the echo of quiet songs hummed by voices that no longer lived. The garden had been here for countless generations, keeping their moments, their stillness, their dreams. And then, faintly, like the softest thread of music, she felt something more personal. A memory not her own, yet it stirred her as if it belonged to her heart. She saw a woman in an old-fashioned gown, her face lit by lantern light, standing beneath this very tree. Her expression was peaceful, yet filled with longing. She, too, had found the garden. She, too, had rested here, leaving behind her worries in the embrace of its silence. The vision drifted away, like mist dissolving with the morning sun, but the sense of it remained. Evelyn opened her eyes, her palms pressed gently against the bark. "This place remembers," she whispered, though she did not know why she said it aloud. The oak seemed to respond with a slow shiver of its branches. Petals fell, though no blossoms grew on its limbs, scattering faintly in the meadow like snow. The air grew even softer, wrapping her in calm, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt herself fully still. The garden was no longer just a curiosity. It was becoming a companion. It was teaching her how to listen not only to its whispers, but to the quiet places inside herself she had long ignored. After a time, Evelyn rose, her body reluctant to leave the cradle of the roots. She brushed her hand once more along the trunk, a silent thank you, and turned toward a faintly glowing arch at the far edge of the meadow. The garden was not finished with her. It was leading her deeper still. The sundial stayed with Evelyn long after she left it behind. Even as she walked further, she could still feel its hum in her fingertips, a vibration that seemed to settle inside her chest. It was almost like carrying a second heartbeat, soft, steady, reassuring. The path ahead grew narrower, its pale stones giving way to a carpet of moss. Each step pressed gently into its springy surface, silent and forgiving, as though the earth itself was cushioning her movement. She became aware of how heavy her footsteps usually sounded in the world beyond this gate, and how different it felt to move here, quietly, lightly, with no need to rush. Above her, the branches knit together in an intricate lattice. They were not dark but luminous, each leaf holding a faint glimmer, like starlight caught and cradled. Between their woven shapes, the true stars sparkled in broken fragments, as if the night sky itself had leaned down to peer through the garden canopy. She walked for some time without thought of where the path might lead. Here, time had no weight. There was only the rhythm of her breath, the hush of leaves, the feeling that the garden was gently carrying her forward. Then the path curved, and she stepped into a clearing. Evelyn stopped where she was, her lips parting in awe. Spread before her lay a wide meadow, unlike any space she had seen in the garden so far. Its grasses glimmered silver, each blade moving as if brushed by invisible hands. The air here felt different, thicker, more solemn, like entering a sanctuary. At the meadow center rose a tree so vast and commanding that it seemed almost a creature of myth. Its trunk was broad, its bark etched with deep grooves that spoke of centuries upon centuries of endurance. The branches rose high, and though the leaves were many, they shimmered between silver and green as though they did not belong entirely to one season, or perhaps to one world. The pull toward the tree was undeniable. Evelyn began to cross the meadow, the grass brushing softly against her legs, cool as silk. Every step drew her closer into its presence, and the nearer she came, the more she felt the change in the air. The silence here was thick, reverent, as though even the night held its breath. She reached the roots, which spread wide across the ground like great arms stretched in rest. Between them, a hollow formed, a cradle of wood and earth, shaped as though it had been waiting for someone to sit within. Without hesitation, Evelyn lowered herself into it. The fit was uncanny. The curve of the roots held her body perfectly, as if molded just for her. The instant her back touched the bark, she felt it. A pulse. Not a sound, not a trick of the imagination, but a deep, living rhythm rising from the tree into her spine. It moved slowly, like the turning of the earth itself, steady, immense, unending. The heartbeat of something older than stone, older than the sky she looked upon. Her eyes closed. She surrendered to it, her own breath falling into rhythm with the great tree. And then the whispers came. Not words exactly, but impressions, memories carried on currents of stillness. She heard the laughter of children who had once run barefoot through these grasses. She felt the brush of skirts trailing along mossy stones, the faint warmth of lantern light, the hush of voices that had long since faded into history. Each moment passed through her like a ripple in water, belonging not to her yet resonating within her bones. The garden remembered. Her chest ached softly, a sweet ache, as if the tree were reminding her of something she had forgotten. And then, just for an instant, she saw her. A woman, standing beneath the same branches, her gown stitched in old-fashioned patterns, her hair coiled neatly at her neck. Lantern light touched her face, showing eyes both tender and wistful. She rested her hand upon the tree, as Evelyn did now, her lips parted as though whispering to it. The vision shimmered and dissolved, drifting away like smoke. But the sensation remained, a quiet understanding that she was not the first to be held by this place, and she would not be the last. Her eyes opened slowly. Above her, the branches shifted, though no wind stirred them. Leaves glimmered, scattering down faint trails of silver light. Petals she had not noticed before tumbled gently through the air, settling across her lap and hair. She did not brush them away. They felt like blessings. "This place remembers," she murmured aloud. Her own voice startled her in the stillness, though the sound was soft. The oak seemed to respond with the faintest vibration, as if acknowledging her words. The silence that followed was not empty but full, like a pause held before the answer to a question. She lingered, unwilling to move, cocooned in the rhythm of the tree. Minutes might have passed, or hours. Time felt irrelevant. It was enough to simply exist within its embrace. But slowly, gently, something inside urged her to rise. The garden had more to show. Evelyn slid from the cradle of the roots, brushing her palm once more along the bark in silent thanks. As she stepped back, she saw it, an archway of woven branches glowing faintly at the far end of the meadow. Its light was soft, beckoning, like a lantern in fog. She hesitated only a moment. Then, with her breath steady and her heart lighter than when she had first entered the gate, Evelyn walked toward it. The garden was waiting, and now she was ready to follow deeper. The glowing archway seemed to shimmer as Evelyn drew closer, its woven branches alive with soft light. She paused at its threshold, one hand brushing against the bark. The surface was warm, not like ordinary wood, but as though touched by the sun even in the cool night. For a moment, she closed her eyes and simply breathed, letting the calm settle into her bones. Then she stepped through. The garden changed. Beyond the archway stretched a hidden glade, smaller than the meadow she had left, yet more mysterious. Its grass was deep green, almost velvet, and the air carried a faint fragrance of honey and rain. In the center stood a pool, round, still, perfectly clear. The surface reflected not just the stars above, but something more, constellations Evelyn did not recognize, patterns of light that seemed to belong to another sky altogether. She moved closer, her footsteps hushed, and gazed into its depths. At first, she saw only her reflection. Then, slowly, ripples spread outward, though she had not touched the water. Images began to shimmer on the surface, scenes that felt both foreign and familiar. She saw herself as a child, running through fields of wildflowers, her laughter bright against the summer air. She saw herself older, weary from the world, longing for stillness she could not name. She saw herself tonight, stepping through the iron gate into this garden as though answering a call that had lingered for years. The images blurred, then shifted. She saw the woman from before, the one in the lantern-lit gown, kneeling by the same pool, her hands pressed in prayer. She saw others, too, men and women across centuries, pausing here, resting, listening. All of them had found this place. All of them had been received. The water stilled once more, leaving only the reflection of Evelyn's face. Yet now her eyes looked different. Not younger, not older, but clearer, as if the garden had brushed away a layer of dust she hadn't known she carried. A voice stirred in her chest. Not her own, and yet not foreign. "This is why you are here." It was not sound. It was knowing. The garden had been waiting, not for chance footsteps, but for hearts in need. It was a sanctuary for the quiet within, for the parts of people that the world forgot, for the selves they lost in rushing days and restless nights. It did not call to everyone, only to those who were ready to pause. Evelyn placed her hands on the edge of the pool, bowing her head. A warmth spread through her, not sharp, not sudden, but steady, like embers kindled after a long silence. The garden did not demand anything of her. It simply offered its presence. And in that stillness, Evelyn understood. This was not merely a garden that waited. It was a garden that listened. A garden that remembered. And, most of all, a garden that healed. When she finally rose, the air around her seemed lighter, the stars above brighter. The archway behind her glowed faintly, waiting to lead her onward. She took one last look at the pool, its surface calm once more, then stepped back onto the path. Wherever it led next, she was no longer afraid. For she carried the garden within her now. The archway shimmered as Evelyn approached, woven from branches that seemed more alive than any she had seen before. Each leaf glowed softly, their veins traced with light like threads of silver, and the entire arch pulsed faintly, almost like a living breath. She paused at its threshold, placing her hand upon the wood. It was warm. Not warm in the way of sun-baked stone, but warm as though it carried the memory of countless hands before hers. She felt a quiet hum beneath her palm, a vibration that traveled up her arm, into her chest. For a long moment, Evelyn stood still, letting the sensation move through her like a slow tide. Then, with steady breath, she stepped through. The garden shifted around her. Gone was the meadow of silver grass and the towering oak. Ahead stretched a hidden glade, hushed and secret, as if it had been folded carefully inside the garden's heart. The air here was different, heavier with scent, rich with something sweet and faintly earthy, like honey drizzled over warm soil after a rain. It filled her lungs, grounding and soothing at once. At the center of the glade rested a pool. Perfectly round, its surface lay impossibly still, reflecting the night sky with crystalline clarity. Yet it was not the same sky Evelyn had walked beneath earlier. The constellations were unfamiliar, shapes of light she had never seen, arcs of stars woven into patterns beyond her knowing. They shimmered like maps to distant places, or perhaps to hidden parts of herself. She moved closer, her steps slow and reverent. The pool seemed to invite her, not with words, but with presence, as though it had been waiting patiently for her arrival. She knelt at its edge, her hands brushing the soft grass that grew thick and cool around it. When she gazed into the water, she saw at first only her reflection, pale face, weary eyes, the strands of hair that had fallen loose from her bun. The sight made her catch her breath, for she looked different than she had when she first entered the garden. The weariness seemed lighter now, her face softer, as though the place had already begun to smooth the sharp edges of her spirit. Then the water stirred. Ripples spread outward, though Evelyn had not touched it. Her reflection blurred, dissolved, and gave way to images. First, she saw herself as a child, running barefoot through fields of golden grass, her laughter clear and bright. She remembered that day, the air sharp with the scent of summer, the world wide and endless around her. The image faded, replaced by another, herself, older, her shoulders weighed down, her smile absent. She recognized the look of exhaustion she had carried for so long, the feeling of rushing through days without ever pausing. And then she saw herself tonight, standing before the garden gate, hesitating before stepping through, as though the choice had been far more significant than she realized at the time. The pool shifted again, revealing others. The woman in the lantern-lit gown, her hand resting upon the great oak. A young man in simple clothes kneeling here by the water, his eyes closed in silent prayer. A child curled in the grass nearby, fast asleep with a look of peace upon her face. And more still, faces across centuries, their features blurred by time, yet their presence unmistakable. Each had found their way here. Each had been received. Evelyn's breath trembled in her throat. The water stilled, holding her reflection once more. But now the eyes that gazed back seemed clearer. Not the tired, dulled eyes she remembered from her mornings, but something brighter, steadier, like windows washed by a gentle rain. And then, within her, a voice stirred. Not a sound, not words, but a knowing. This is why you are here. The realization settled into her with the inevitability of dawn. The garden was not simply a place of beauty. It was a sanctuary. It waited for those who carried too much, who needed to remember stillness, who needed to be seen not by others, but by themselves. It had always waited. Not for just anyone, for those who were ready. Evelyn lowered her head, her hands pressed against the grass at the pool's edge. The earth was cool beneath her palms, grounding her, holding her gently. Warmth spread through her chest, steady and deep, as if the pool had placed a flame there, not blazing, but glowing softly, like embers in a hearth. Tears came to her eyes, but they did not fall from sorrow. They came from release, from the soft loosening of something she had carried for too long without knowing. The garden asked for nothing in return. It did not demand or speak. It only offered its presence, its patience, its remembering. And for Evelyn, that was enough. She rose slowly, her body reluctant to leave, her eyes lingering upon the pool that now reflected only the stars. The archway behind her still glowed faintly, its light waiting to guide her onward. But she knew no matter where she went next, no matter what paths the garden revealed, she carried its gift within her now. The pool, the oak, the whispers of time, they were not simply places she had visited. They were seeds planted in her heart. And already, she could feel them beginning to grow.
And so, dear dreamer, our story finds its gentle close. But your night continues calm and unbroken. Let your thoughts drift, as lightly as clouds across a moonlit sky. Let your body sink, as deeply as roots into the quiet earth. There is no need to hold on, no need to listen further, only to rest. For the story remains with you, carrying you through the night, until morning's light comes softly to call. Good night, and sweet dreams. From the Midnight Library. Crescent moon sparkles, break time equals 2000